Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Gentleman Psychic. It is so lovely to have you here. I know it's a little bit early for story time, but I always like to come in just a few minutes early, just so that we can have a little moment together, you and I, and of course, all of my dead birds. Welcome again. As I said, tonight we will be reading The Devil's Mansion as we continue our journey through the dark. It is a tale written in 1932, or rather published in 1932, and is the tale about a young man who has found himself on a dark road seeking shelter at an old house in northern part of Canada. And of course, he is shunned, and then he realizes that he is in the wrong space. Good evening, Mary Jane. He realizes that he is in the wrong space, and then the next morning, a young woman is being taken up to that creepy old house. And of course, now she wants to get away. Good evening, Angela Bowley. Good evening, Mr. John Maxwell. Good evening. What a glorious day it is today. I hope that everyone can hear me. Riley, hello and welcome. For those of you who are joining now, those of you who are joining in the future, I will say that I am your host. Richard-Lael is one name. Richard-Lael is not two names. If I were just Richard, I'd be a dick. Anyway, with that, it is something that I always love to do. And for some reason, it is now 8 o'clock here in Central Time Zone. The timer did not go off. That is okay. We are still learning this space and learning where we are. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, guys and gals, non-gender pals, welcome. It is time now for you to pick your poison. It is time for you to have a good little snuggle with your princess or with your teddy bear or with your devil. I certainly like the latter, of course. Now, the Devil's Mansion. Chapter 16. Miss Bosvain was much weaker that morning. She talked in a whisper, unable to raise her voice. Now and then, a spasm of pain flicked across her face. Janet could hardly imagine that this was the same woman she had seen sitting in the chair when she first came into the room. The woman with the strong, proud voice, the woman with her shoulders erect and straight. She missed the golden chain from Miss Bosvain's neck, and the chameleon, it's gone. Dead, the woman whispered, answering the girl's unasked question. Gone dead, as I shall be soon. Last night was too much for it. A sigh shook her body. Did you hear the piano last night, child? Janet nodded. Did it frighten you? The girl nodded. I'm sorry, child. Will you bring me that little box in the drawer of that table? Her eyes indicated the table by her side. Janet obediently opened the drawer and pulled out lapis lazuli box. Open it. You will find a miniature of me, painted when I was a girl. There were several miniatures in the box, beside some letters and a tarnished silver vial. The thought flashed through Janet's brain that this was the vial containing poison. Gingerly, she picked up one of the miniatures. It was very small, scarcely 2 inches across, and fitted into the narrow gold frame which was studded with tiny emeralds. The hair she recognized, red curls piled high on the wide, girlish face, hair even too heavy then for the strong features. Miss Bosvain when she was a girl. True, there was nothing beautiful about the face, nothing lovely, but Janet liked the small eyes which seemed to look into hers. Something true, something honest about them. Miss Bosvain viewed the miniature silently as Janet held it near her. She said nothing for a long time, but when Janet looked at her, she saw tears falling down the yellow cheeks and sliding softly onto the white pillow. Yes, that was Morel Bosvane, when she was 17. 17, child, before I ran away from this house, before I knew what the world was holding in store for me. Morella Bosvane at 17. You'd hardly recognize her, would you? It seems a very good likeness to me, Janet assured her. But when she said it, she thought how white the skin on the miniature was, white and glowing with life, and then how yellow and sickly the skin of the woman lying near her. Idly, Janet picked up another miniature, that of an elderly man with grayish red hair and a thick red beard. There seemed a malevolent gleam in his eyes. My father, Miss Bosvane murmured softly. But this was not the face Janet had seen in the crystal. That was a young face, and the eyes, while similar, were not the same. Of course, the man in the crystal had red hair, but it was not the same as this beautifully painted miniature. My father. But his was not the face I saw in the crystal, Janet ventured. No? There was still another miniature, a painting of a woman with dark eyes and black hair, a young man. It was framed in the same manner as the others. Miss Bosvane reached weakly for it, and after looking at it for a moment, placed it at her side. A lover, Janet thought, a lover that she had not married, and was sorry now. The girl was about to close the box. When the sick woman asked for the letters which were on the bottom. She wanted them under her pillow, and Janet put them there half tenderly. Is there nothing more in the box? Yes, a large ruby and a silver vial, Janet said. You may have the stone, child. It is yours. The vial you may have too. It will serve you well, perhaps, if you stay on in this house. Keep you always. You never know when to use it. I can't take them, Miss Bosvane. Neither of them. Must. I like you. You have been like a daughter to me while you've been here. You must take them. You need the vial. But I'm not going to stay, Miss Bosvane. I'm going away. Miss Bosvane closed her eyes. Janet thought she saw her head shake in sad negation. Perhaps you have a lucky star, child, luckier than mine. I was born under a frightful planet. Only a little happiness in my life, just a little, but it was taken from me so soon. You have been unhappy too, child. I see it in your eyes. They are tired, too tired for a girl's eyes. You too have suffered. I have tried to read your eyes many times, but they are so strong for me, too strong. They elude me. I cannot tell what your future will be. I am weak. I have been for many years. I am lame. Did you fall? No, child, but I have not walked for 20 years. There is nothing the matter with my legs. I am not paralyzed, but I cannot walk. And Nita cannot talk. It is the curse my father put upon me that day so long ago. So long ago. When I was 17 years old. I hear him yet. We were in this room. I had told him love and was going to run away with a man I adored and he hated because he knew how he would lose me. He laughed wildly and cursed me, struck me with his riding whip across my cheek. He was sitting here by the fire where my chair now is, and I was standing. There, near him, a young thing, frightened at everything, but brave because I loved. After his curse, I crept out, still brave because I loved. I ran away, child, with my man, but he died as we were going away, and I knew then my father's curse was coming true. I dared not come back, so I stayed away, and I never saw my father again. Janet saw the room again, as it must have been in Moralia's youth. The girl's father sitting in the chair, alternately laughing and cursing at her. Morelia standing, her shoulders erect, fighting for her love. A girl slim and very tall, too tall, with curls on her head, red curls that glowed in the firelight. A trembling girl, stealing out to the man she loved, going away with him, the curse her father ringing in her ears. You were very young at the time and superstitious, she said kindly. Child, you do not know what happened to me. I have been waiting for death for years, and now I feel it so close, so very close. I can breathe the dank earth. Perhaps by tonight, if I am lucky, I shall be on the rim of the stars. There is just a slender thread holding me, a thread I am trying to break with all the weak strength I have left. Someone is holding that thread, someone who wants me to live and suffer more. Raja has not been here all morning, Janet said, seeking to change the subject. He will not be here all day, child. He is guarding your Mr. Rodman. Mr. Rodman? Yes, Mr. Rodman is in the stable. I must go to him. No, stay with me. He is safe so long as he stays there. One move to leave, and Raja will tear him to ribbons. Why can't you call him away? The girl cried passionately. I am not his mistress. You should know that. He obeys only the devil. So long as Mr. Rodman stays in the stable, then, he's safe. Yes, so long as he stays there. But he will starve there, you see. Nita cannot take food to him. Starve? Yes, starve. I can do nothing for him. And I like him too. He's a clean young man, a man I should like to have for a son. I can take food to him. Miss Bosvane looked frightened, and her breath caught in her throat. You would risk Raja? Yes. You are stronger than I, then. May I go now? Stay with me a moment, child. I am dying, and if I am alone, the thread that holds me to life will pull me further away from death. Don't leave me alone now. The sick, weary eyes were pleading Janet, and she sat down again. Something in this woman's voice she could not resist, something she could not tell what it was. Nita could stay. Nita will do me no good. The clock ticked loudly in the silent room. Janet's thoughts were on Blair Rodman. Miss Bosvane had said he was in the stable. Was she telling the truth? After all, there would be no point in her lying now. After a while, Janet walked to the front window and looked out to see the car. It was gone, and only deep ruts in the grass-covered path showed where it had stood. Ring for Nita to come, Miss Bosvane spoke. Janet jingled the silver bell and shuddered at the music it made in the still house. She heard its echo after she had rung it. When Nita came, she went straight to her mistress's bed. Miss Bosvane tried to put out her hand to touch the servant, but she had not that much strength left. Bury me in the garden, Nita, by the stone bench. Do this last thing for me. A shriek of laughter rang through the room. Janet looked wildly around, but the only three of them were present, Nita, the sick woman, and herself. None of them had laughed. Child, stand closer to me. Hold my hand. He's trying to keep me. Again came the laughter. Softer this time, a man's laughter. He's trying to hold me." For a long time, Nita and Janet stood over the chair. Janet saw tears fall silently down Nita's wrinkled cheeks. She felt some in her own eyes. She did not know why. After all, this dying woman meant nothing to her. Still, she pitied the woman. Such pity she had never felt for anyone before. And that laughter. She was tense because she thought it would come again. Miss Bosvain had seemed frightened at it. It was holding her from death. Laughter when a woman was dying. A man's laughter. The only man around was Blair Rodman in the stable, unless Miss Bosvain had died. This could not be Blair's laughter. Finally, Nita bent forward and felt her mistress's heart. The hand Janet was holding seemed to have no pulse. The servant kissed the woman's forehead tenderly. When she turned to Janet, her eyes stared hopelessly and her closed lips were trembling. Is she dead?" the girl asked. Nita opened the drawer and drew out a pad of paper and pencil. She scribbled something quickly and Janet bent over to read it. Excuse me. "Yes, she's dead. You must stay with her until I return. Do not leave the room for an instant." Crumbling the paper after Janet had read it, she tore it into bits and threw the bits into the fireplace. Then she put a match to the paper. Janet watched her leave the room, heard her faintly open the kitchen door. She was alone, with Miss Bosvain's body. Instinctively, she moved her chair further away. Blair Rodman out in the barn, with Raja guarding him. Raja would tear him to pieces if he made a move to leave. Did he know how dangerous that dog was? Surely he did. Surely he would not try to get out. A half-audible prayer left the girl's lips, a prayer for him to stay there until she could warn him. The drapes were fluttering on the window, which was partly open, and a beam of sunlight spotted with innumerable diamonds was playing on the floor. She looked around the big room, the piano, her eyes turned away from it quickly, but something drew them back again. Something was lying on the closed cover. Something long and thin, with a bowl, a pipe. She walked over to the instrument and looked closer to be sure. It was a pipe, and she had never noticed it before. It could not have been there yesterday. She had not glanced at the piano today, but she had examined it carefully yesterday, last night, when she was alone with Miss Bosvain. A pipe. To whom could it belong? Some of the burned tobacco had fallen on the rosewood, and Miss Bosvain had said, almost in her last breath, "He's trying to keep me here." He was the owner of the pipe. The whistler? The master of Raja? For surely Raja must have a master. Yet Nita, he obeys the devil, the sick woman had said. The devil? Yet Nita told her, written her rather, to stay in this room with Miss Bosvain. She was not to leave for an instant. Frightened, Janet grasped the silver bell and shook it furiously, then waited for the servant to appear. Again and again she shook it, but no Nita. Discouraged, she sat down. Nita had not heard. She must be outside, far away, so far away she could not hear the bell. Perhaps she'd gone to the town of Bosvain, walked those miles to secure help. Comforted a little with this thought, Janet was calmer. How long, though, would it take Nita to walk those 6 miles to Bosvain, and those 6 miles back? Hours, probably hours, and in the meantime, she would be in the house. In this house, which even Miss Bosvain feared so much. Why did Nita want to stay with Miss Bosvain? Janet stole a look at the woman lying on the chair bed. Did she just imagine, or was it true that her face seemed happier and a slight smile lit her features? Certainly the face did not look as it had in life, hard with eyes only softened and somewhat kind. Yes, and the skin, which had been so yellow, was lighter now. Younger Miss Bosvain looked by many years, younger in death. The girl's eyes were on the clock. Nita had been gone for an hour now, an hour that seemed 10. On the table near the dead woman, the lapis lazuli box lay, the lid open. Beside it, the two miniatures. Janet remembered that the other, the one with the black-haired man, was under Miss Bosvain's pillow. She herself had placed it there, at the woman's bidding, along with a few letters. On the table near the box was the silver vial, hardly as big as her thumb. Also the gleaming red ruby on the polished surface of the table. It was casting out a red light. Had it been a ring? It was too large for that, she thought. Probably it had been the drop on a pendant. Janet had seen but a few jewels in her life, never one as large as this. Vaguely, she remembered as a child her father showing her her mother's jewels, so vaguely that she was not sure that she had even seen them. She must have been very young then. She had never seen them again. They must have been sold to pay their living expenses. Perhaps she and her father had lived on the money they had brought for years and years. Oh, Miss Bosvain's hand as it lay across her chest. On Miss Bosvain's hand, as it lay across her hand, she saw the crystal ring with its plain silver setting. A setting that did not bind the round, clear stone at all. What a queer woman she was. Despite her superstitions, Janet was positive she had a real reason to be afraid. This house. The strange occurrences, even in the few days she had been in it. The dog. Nita's dumb, true affection. Timidly, she glanced at the mirrorless frames, glad for once she could see nothing in them. No reflection of the room, or the woman lying dead in the chair bed. She longed to leave the room, longed to get out through the kitchen and to the stable where Miss Bosvain had said Blair Rodman was. Nita's note seemed more like a command to her than a request. She must stay until the servant returned. Another hour went by. Janet was beginning to worry, but Nita could not walk that 12 miles in 2 hours, and that as if she had gone to Bosvain, and Janet could think of no other place that she could go. Noon. Now and then the girl walked to the window to see if she could see Nita coming up the road. She thought suddenly, if Nita had gone to Bosvain for help, she could only have to walk one way. Someone would take her back. She could make the 6 miles back in a car in a few minutes. Although she listened intently for the sound of a motor, she heard nothing except the occasional short song of the bird outside, the stir of bushes as their leaves touched each other in the wind. She remembered the day she had come back from a short errand and had found her father still and lifeless in his chair. The frantic cry for help and the mad rush to the telephone for a doctor. 4 years ago. Miss Bosvain had said her eyes were tired, too old for her. It was true that she had suffered and suffered alone. There were her lonely years with her father and lonelier years afterward. Once, 1 o'clock and no Nita. She might have fainted on the way in the sun. It was warm out, fainted from exhaustion and excitement. But Nita was strong and sturdy, old as she must be. A buzzing fly settled on Miss Bosvain's hand. Janet edged over and chased it away, but her fingertips touched the dead woman's hand, and she drew back, a sob in her throat. The hand was ice cold. The slight sound of a door opening, and Janet sprang forward. It might be Raja. With glazed eyes, she looked at the swinging door. It opened slowly, and Nita appeared, her face wet with sweat, her hair straggling over her plain face. Her dress was streaked with dirt, and her hands were red and soiled. She walked straight to the dead woman, with not so much as a glance at Janet. "Nita, where have you been? I've been so worried, so frightened. Nita, write it for me. Did you bring help?" Janet rushed to the table and brought her the pad and pencil. The servant still did not look at her. She was breathing hard, and her shoulders were bent a little. Taking the paper and pencil and stooping over the low table, she slowly wrote a few words. Then, bending over the bed, she took the lifeless body of her mistress in her strong arms and started with her burden to the door. Janet looked at the note several times before the words made any impression on her mind. I have been digging her grave. The girl stumbled to her chair bed and reached under the pillow for the letters and the miniature. She was sobbing hysterically as she followed Nita through the kitchen and into the garden to the fresh grave near the stone bench. Chapter 17. Janet and Nita were back in the kitchen. Nita sitting on a chair by the window, looking out on the newly covered grave in the garden. Janet leaning against the sink. The big woman was fanning her hot face with her hand. Janet had tried to make the servant go into the living room and sit down, but she would do nothing but stay at the kitchen window and watch the grave. She had shaken her head empathetically when Janet had asked her to rest. So the girl, because she did not wish to be alone, and because she wanted to keep Nita company, stayed with her. A clean sheet had been carefully laid beside the grave. Nita had tenderly placed her mistress in it, and, turning to Janet, had taken the miniature and the letters and put them at the woman's side. Then she had folded the sheet around Miss Bosvain and lifted her into the grave. Janet, her fingers over the face and tears streaming down her cheeks, heard the dirt fall into the grave as Nita shoveled it in. No prayer, nothing. Yet it was as solemn, as tender, as beautiful, as if the funeral had been in a cathedral. The song of the bees, the hummingbirds fluttering in their little wings, the sun on its downward course in the heavens, the breath of the trees, the music of the fresh, clean air. After the grave was filled, Nita had stooped to her knees for a moment and crossed herself. Then, quickly rising, she had gone to a flowering shrub and gathered arms full of snowy white flowers and had covered the dirt with them. It was blooming now, the grave. A bower of pale blossoms and cool green foliage. You should have called someone, an undertaker, a doctor, Janet said as she looked at the servant. Nita shook her head, not taking her eyes off the grave. Will you go to the stable with me, Miss Bosvain? The name came strangely, hesitantly to her lips. Miss Bosvain said that Mr. Rodman was there. I must see him and talk to him. Nita took her eyes off the grave and looked at the girl. That she had something to say, Janet was sure. Nita pointed to her room off the kitchen, and on the bed the girl found a piece of paper and a stub of pencil. She hurried back with them. You must not leave me now that Miss Morelli is gone, or I shall die. Your friend is safe in the stable at present. This note, Janet finished reading it. She tore it into bits, and handing the bits to Janet, indicated that she could put them in the stove. Can't we go out and just see if he's there? Again, Nita answered in her writing. Later. Janet made another trip to the stove with the paper. Suddenly, Nita looked startled and got up from her chair. She beckoned Janet to follow her and hurried into the living room. The room was as they had left it, yet Janet did not understand the frightened look in Nita's eyes. The servant went immediately to the table where the lapis box stood open. She lifted it, puzzled frown on her face. Janet's glance followed hers, from the box to the place where the ruby and the silver vial had been. They were gone. Are you looking for the ruby and the vial? From Nita's answering look, the girl knew she was. I left them on the table. They were there while I was waiting for you. I know they were there when you came in, but now they are gone. Someone has been in the room since we left it. The girl caught hold of the work-worn hand on the older woman. Nita pressed it kindly to the two of them, and the two of them walked back to the kitchen. Nita was carrying the lapis box and the two miniatures. Hardly were they seated when the piano started playing, the same nerve-wracking tune Janet heard twice before. She crept into Nita's arms, and the servant who rocked her slowly as if she were a baby. "Who is it?" For answer, Nita pressed her close to her arms. "Am I dreaming, Nita? Dreaming? I hear the music." Janet looked up nervously. Nita shook her head no. Janet was not dreaming. Someone was playing the piano. The tune did not last long, perhaps 15 minutes. Then silence even more terrible than the music, a silence that was wrought with the bars that had been played. Nita was putting on the kettle for a cup of tea for Janet. The girl had not a thing to eat since the night before, when the silver bell in the living room rang loudly. The servant halted, kettle in hand, and stood quite still for a moment, her eyes on the door into the hall. It seemed to Janet as if she were hesitating, undecided as to whether she should go answer its summons. Again the bell rang, this time more imperiously. Nita put the kettle on the stove and started for the door. "Don't go, Nita," Janet cried. Had not Nita said in her note for Janet not to leave her, that she would die if she were alone? And here she was going away. At the sound of the girl's voice, the servant stopped. Another ring on the bell decided her. She opened the door, and Janet was alone in the kitchen. She waited for the sound from the living room. There was none. It was as if Nita were in the room alone. Then, taking heart, she ran quickly out the back door and turned the corner of the house. The stable was in full view, and Blair Rodman was sitting at the high window. A low cry left her lips. When she saw she had a white bandage around his head, how pale his face was, how drawn. He must have suffered terribly. He saw her, and standing up, waved his hand. She was making for the window when, just in time, she saw Raja. He was at the stable door, growling. "Where have you been?" "I tried to get out earlier, but so much was happened. Miss Bosvane died this morning, and Nita has buried her." "Buried her?" "Yes." They were talking in low tones, the girl half away to the stable and the man at the window. "The dog has been for hours. He won't move. I dare not go while he is there. And I've been worried sick about you. Promise me you won't try to leave until he goes. He is dangerous. Miss Bosvane said he would kill you." She stopped suddenly. "Don't worry, I won't. I don't like his looks. I'm starved. Can you manage to get something to eat for me?" Janet ran back to the kitchen as fast as she could. Nita had not come back. Some bread she could throw up to him. She found a loaf and hurried back with it. Raja was snarling now, viciously. Blair leaned far out the window, and Janet tossed the loaf. He caught it and smiled his thanks as he tore off a piece and started to eat. "Couldn't you take my car and get help?" he asked between bites. "The car is gone from the front of the house. I don't know where I thought of that." "Gone?" "Yes, and it's just the same now that Miss Bosvane is dead. There's someone in the house." "Do you know who it is?" "No, but I think it's a man." Blair nodded. The blow he had received, the mysterious visitor who had kicked him, all this pointed to the fact that a man was in the house. "Where's Nita?" "She's still with him. He just rang for her." "You haven't seen him?" "No," and she shuddered perceptibly and looked back over her shoulder. "If I could only get out of here. Not while Raja is watching. Tonight, then. He can't stay forever." Blair was looking down at the girl tenderly. She seemed so young, so lovely, as she stood there, her hair awry, her face lifted to him, the white face with her lips blood red. They were quivering, he thought. Just then, Nita appeared at the corner without a glance at Blair, walked toward the girl, and took her by the arm. "He's up there, Nita," and Janet pointed at the window. Still, Nita did not look, but led the girl back to the kitchen door. Janet was loath to go. She wanted to stay and talk with Blair. There were so many things that she had not said. Just a moment together was all they had. In the kitchen, Nita sank on a chair and motioned Janet to pour the boiling water into the waiting teapot. When Janet handed her a steaming cup, she pushed it away with a hand that was trembling. "What is it, Nita? Tell me." The servant looked at her blankly, and her lips opened slightly and then closed again. The servant Janet had forgotten she was addressing a dumb woman, forgotten everything except the stark fear in Nita's eyes. "Tell me," she cried again impatiently. Again, Nita opened her lips. It seemed as if she were trying to talk. Nita had uttered a word. A startled look passed over her face, and her dull eyes brightened. "Nita, tell me," Janet insisted. Perhaps the woman was not dumb. Perhaps she could talk. "Nita, The sound was hollow, like the echo of a deep voice in an empty house. "Nita, I can't talk." Her head was in her arms, and she was sobbing wildly. Janet dropped on her knees and patted the woman's shoulders. "You can talk. You have just said something. You said you couldn't talk, but you can. You can, Nita." Nita straightened up, the tears still streaming from her eyes. Her voice caught in the short gasps in her throat, but her eyes had a triumphant look. "I haven't," she formed her words slowly, like a child learning to walk. "I haven't talked for years, since he told me I couldn't." "Who is he?" the girl encouraged. "He told me I could never talk again, as he told Miss Morelia she could never walk again. We must go right away. We can't leave Mr. Rodman." Starting to her feet, Nita touched her tongue with her fingers. She was smiling to herself as she faced Janet. "We must go now, while Raja is guarding Mr. Rodman. He won't bother us alone. We can run until we get to the main road. He won't bother us there." "But Nita, he told me now a few minutes ago when he called me that he would have you." "Have me?" Janet gasped and sank into the chair. "You are to be his wife." Janet could say nothing. She looked blankly at the servant, her violet eyes wide with fear. "His wife?" she said after a while, when she could talk again. "Yes, his wife." The older woman took her arm. "Come." Still the girl sat numb with fear. "We only have a few minutes. He is out of the house now." Nita grasped more firmly and tried to carry her from the kitchen. "Who is he?" Janet asked. "He is..." Nita stopped and glanced around the room, as if someone were listening. She was holding Janet in her arms. "Yes?" the girl asked weakly. "He is Miss Morelia's son, the devil himself." Her husky voice was charged with fright. Chapter 18. When Janet opened her eyes, she was on the kitchen table, and Nita was standing over her, bathing her forehead with cool water. She was dizzy, and the kitchen seemed moving in circles around her. I must have fainted," she murmured, blinking her eyes. Nita lifted her in her strong arms and carried her to the cot in her room. Janet sank on it thankfully. After a short rest, she felt better. Nita was rubbing her wrists slowly to bring back the circulation. "I never faint, Nita," she said. "I can't remember when I have ever have. My nerves must have all gone." "Don't try to talk. Just lie for a while." "I don't understand anything. Will you tell me about this house and everything in it?" She waited for Nita's answer, but the woman was gazing toward the kitchen, still mechanically rubbing her hands. She was muttering something under her breath, something Janet could not understand. "What is it?" "Too late now to go. We'll have to wait here." Janet lay on the cot, silent. Too late now," Nita had said. "Too late?" She remembered how happy she had been when going down the street car to Going down on the streetcar to work that morning a few months back, she had seen Miss Bosevane's ad in the newspaper. She was reading. How excited she had been when she answered it during her noon hour. The days she had lived through the weeks until an answer had come. As the time passed with no answer, she thought another companion had been chosen. She had almost given up hope when Miss Bosevane's letter had come. Then her little packing, and did not have many clothes, her trip to Bosevane, the dreams she had dreamed on the way. What was it Nita had said? That she was to be his wife? The wife of Miss Morelia's son? Miss Bosevane's son? Did she have one? He had not been mentioned at all. He was not included in the occupants of the house, as Miss Bosevane had told her of them. Miss Bosevane's son? How happy the woman had been to die. To the girl, it all seemed so far back, months back, and it had only been today. Miss Bosevane's son? Raja's master? He whom she had never seen? Twilight outside. Twilight that was dimming the little room until Nita's face seemed to be a shadow, a bluish, purple twilight. Soon it would be dark. Once Janet had loved the dark. That was when she was with her father. The dark was so quiet, so kind, so gentle. After the harassing days she had spent with the invalid, she used to sit at the window at home with all the lights off, and could drink in the dark. Here she dreaded it, dreaded what it would bring. The lonely room upstairs, the terrible uncertainty of fear, the music that made her nervous and ill. I can't go upstairs tonight, she whispered to Nita, who was at her side. I can't. No. You stay with me. In the gathering darkness of the room, Nita's eyes were shining brightly as if it were tears in them. Her rough hand was on Janet's. I can talk, the servant continued. Talk. Janet waited patiently for more. She could faintly hear a few night noises, for the kitchen door was open, the fluttering soft song of the birds as they made ready for their nests, half protesting, as if it were not quite dark enough, as if there would be a moment more of the day in which they could fly, could sing, the low hoot of the faraway owl. I can talk. Yes, talk. So many things I want to say. He will be angry at me because I talk. Angry. He may kill me. No, Nita, don't worry. It was Janet's turn to sympathize. You don't know him. He would do anything when angry. Where does he live? Here, in this house? In the summer house, off the garden. You have seen the place. Nita was talking with more confidence now. Her voice had taken on character, although she still formed her words slowly, as if she were not quite sure of them. Yes, the low house off the garden, the house she had imagined would make a fine retreat for her. Raja had snarled at her to keep her away from it when she had wanted to investigate. But he is every place. There isn't a thing he doesn't know. He sees through your face. He reads your mind. He's mad too? Worse than mad. He would strike me dead if he knew I was talking to you about him. But he is gone to his house, and Raja is with Mr. Rodman. He is getting ready. Nita clutched the girl's hand. Janet shivered. It was too preposterous believing that this man, this son of Miss Bosevane, wished to marry her. He is master here, and has been since he and Miss Morel came so many years ago. Yet no one knows he is here. It was the same in Paris, Miss Morelia told me. But he tired of Paris. He wanted to get away, to come here to this house, where he could roam around the woods. Miss Morelia had told him about it. She had to come. but she didn't want to. Had to come because he made her. You cannot disobey him. Close the back door, Nita. I'm afraid he might come in. He won't. He does not want you to see him. He loves you. Janet turned away her face to the wall, moaning softly. Yes, so he says. He did not like the other girl who came, the girl who is in the tower room. She displeased him. So Miss Morelia had to find someone else. Find you. I went up to the door in the East Tower, but it was locked. I know. I was following you. We dared not let you go alone, Miss Morelia and I. If he had seen you, he would have been angry at you. Is she still up there, the girl in the tower? Yes. I take food up to her. She would have starved if I had not. Does he know it? He knows everything, but he would not let the girl go, although we begged him, Miss Morelia and I. Did Miss Bosvain fear him too? Terribly. He was cruel to her. She wanted to die years ago, but he wouldn't let her. Today, when I left you with her, I did it because I had to. I was afraid he would come and wake her. He has done it before. But he would not enter, I knew, when you were there. She's happy now, Miss Morelia is, happier than she has ever been before. I had to bury her today, this afternoon, as soon as I could, so he could not taunt her even in death. God only knows what she has been through, with him around, year after year the same. He told her years ago, 20 years ago, that she could not walk, would never walk again, and she didn't. He took the power of walking from her, as he took the power of speaking from me. You brought it back, miss, somehow, so now I can talk. When he entered this house with Miss Morelia, he laughed at me and pointed his finger at my tongue. You can't talk, he said. You will never talk again. And when I opened my mouth to deny him, I could not talk. For years, Miss Morelia wept for me and begged him to give me my speech back, but still he laughed. He's a demon. But now that I can talk, I don't seem to fear him so much. There has been so much bottled up in me, so much I have seen, so much Miss Morelia has told me, for she used to talk to me. Otherwise, we would have gone mad ourselves in this house. She talked when he was gone with Raja on his walks through the woods every night. We breathed easier then, Miss Morelia and I. Miss Morelia would even smile once in a while when he was gone. Nita stopped and seemed to be listening for something. Miss Bosvain told me she ran away from this house as a girl, ran away with a man, but he died, Janet said. Yes, before they could get married. It was her father's curse, old Simon Bosvain. He cursed her to the day he died. I was with him then. I served him for years, and I knew the old man better than anyone else, even better than Miss Morelia. He meant his curse. Why did he curse her, Nita? She told him about the man she loved. He was a guest in the house at the time. She said she wanted to marry him. Mr. Bosvain told her to go with his curse. He was no saint himself. I used to be afraid of him when I was a girl, but as I grew older, I knew him better. I had nothing to fear from him. He never forgave Miss Morelia. Never, although he gave her a great fortune. We used to play together, Miss Morelia and I, in this house. Even then it was not gay. There was always something lonely about it, something queer, and Miss Morelia fell in love with Maurice Creel. I helped her to see him nights, took their messages back and forth. Perhaps it was my fault things happened as they did. But I loved Miss Morelia, and I knew how unhappy she was with her father. I helped her run away, packed the few things she took, and in the dead of the night got her her horse and one for Maurice out of the stable. There was a gash across her face when she came out and got on her horse. Old Simeon had struck her with his riding whip, but she was happier and gayer than I had ever seen her before. Maurice was young too, the son of Simon's schoolmates in France, but a boy with not a cent in the world. Well, they went away. Months passed before I heard from Miss Morelia again. She did not write to her father, but she wrote to me. After everything had happened, she was in Paris, and Maurice had been killed. 3 days after they had left here. She was broken-hearted, of course, but there was joy in her letters too, for she said she was going to have a child who would be another Maurice to her. I rejoiced with her from far away, but I did not hear from her again for a number of years. I sent a letter after letter to her, but they were all returned as she had moved. I thought perhaps she had died. If she had, we would have had no way to know, for I was the only one who kept in touch with her. 6 years later, I received a letter, an unhappy one, although at the time I could not determine just how it was so unhappy. She had a son, then 5 years old, but I was not to tell a soul about him, not even her father. Simon, in her first letter, she had also warned me to keep her son's coming from her father, as she thought it might embitter him still more. She had named the boy Maurice after the father. I took her at her word and did not mention Maurice to anyone, not even Simon. When I did not hear for years after that, 10 perhaps, when I got another letter, but Maurice was not mentioned. Miss Morel merely wrote that she was not feeling so well, that she had much to worry her, that I was on no condition to mention to her father, if he was still living, that she had written to me, that she was even alive. More years went on, lonely ones for me, because I had Miss Morelia in mind constantly. We'd been very close as girls, you know. Her tutors were mine, for Miss Beausvain had educated us both well, although I was the daughter of his cook and his gardener. Of course, I said nothing to Simon Beausvain about Miss Morelia. But at times I was tempted to tell him he had a grandson. I think it would have pleased him greatly, because my mother said that when Miss Morel was born, he had wanted a son badly, and his grief over the birth of a daughter had killed his wife. True, he pretended to hate Miss Morelia, yet at times in her childhood, I am sure he half loved her. He was a strange man, unforgiving, with a nasty temper. But I said nothing. By this time my mother had died, and my father too. Mr. Beausvain seemed to have lost interest in the house, in everything. He did not replace the old servants. I took my mother's place as his cook. One by one the horses in the stable died, and as there was no further use for help in the stable, they went. Mr. Beausvain had always been proud of his horses, and to see him neglect them was pitiful to me. I could not do everything, so the place ran down as the years went by. For in the last years of Mr. Beausvain's life, there were only 2 of us servants left, me and an old man getting feeble and half blind. Mr. Beausvain would sit hour after hour in the living room, mumbling to himself, cursing Miss Morelia. Finally, he had no visitors, because he was not cordial to those who did come. Then we were alone in the house, me with thoughts of love for Miss Morelia, and he with thoughts of hate. He died 15 years ago, leaving his fortunes to Miss Morelia, all of it except a small annuity for me. He had never changed his will, as he said he was going to. Miss Morelia did not need the money, however, as she had her mother's fortune for years. Her mother was a Frenchwoman, as Simon's people had been. I cabled her immediately about her father's death and urged her and her son to come back to the old house. It was 3 or 4 years before I had an answer, And that answer was very short. She and Maurice were coming to live at the house, but I was to let no man I was to tell no one that Maurice was coming. Indeed, I was to keep her own arrival as secret as possible. She did not want me to come, she said, but Maurice did. She did not want to come, but Maurice did. I can remember the end of the letter still. I shall remember it as long as I live. You will weep with me, Nita, when you see me and the man who is Maurice's son. It was dark in the room now. Janet could not see Nita, but she could hear her heavy, labored breathing and feel the presence of her hand. They had no light, the two of them, the girl lying on the cot and the woman sitting on the edge of it. Nita's voice had grown very husky. Then they came, Janet whispered. They came. I obeyed Miss Morelia. I told no one except the grocer in Beausvain of her arrival, but of course it leaked out from him. No one knew that her son came with her, though. Yes, they came, he and she, in a car, in the dead of night. I was sleeping when the knocker on the front door awakened me, booming through the great lonely house. I hurried downstairs to let them in. My room then was at the back of the second floor. A big car was on the road, and Miss Morelia had called me, Nita, Nita. Later I saw him, and threw myself in Miss Morelia's arms and wept with her. That was when he laughed and told me I could not talk. That night he came, the driver of the big car, and I managed to carry Miss Morelia into the house. She could not walk. When she was in the living room, the driver left. I don't know who he was, nor where he came from, but he had driven Miss Morelia and Maurice from Vancouver. Was Roger with them? Yes, but he was a young dog then. Part wolf. Miss Morelia said Maurice brought him home to her one day in their villa outside Paris, a puppy. How or where he got the dog, she never knew, and he never told. He trained Roger himself. The dog feared him so much he would do anything Maurice commanded. I have a scar here on my arm where Roger tore my flesh away. Why did you stay here when it was so awful, Nita? I had to stay. I couldn't go, but then I would have stayed anyway to help Miss Morelia. She was much more miserable than I. Every day she was more unhappy, and Maurice gloated in her unhappiness. He hated her. He hated everyone. But why? Hush. He's not like us. It was Simon Beausvain's curse. Nita was silent again. Janet thought she was listening for something, so she lay very still too. And how do I come in? She murmured when Nita relaxed a bit. He made Miss Morelia do it. She fought with him about it. She held out as long as she could, but she was weak, too weak for him. He is stronger than all of us. She had to write the first advertisement to a Vancouver paper, for Maurice wanted a young face round the house. A pretty girl, he suggested. She advertised for a companion, more than suggested. He forced Miss Morelia to do it. Well, the first girl didn't suit him. He is very particular. Then you came. Miss Morelia was frightened nearly to death at what she had done, at what she had done because of him. Hell, it was all those days. But he liked you from the moment he saw you, and he saw you come. He was in the living room behind the back tapestry, where he used to listen to everything Miss Morelia would say. He is jealous of your Mr. Rodman, but he dared not kill him for fear someone would come and see him. Maurice, he hates to have people see him, and very few ever have seen him. But his wits are good. Last night he took Mr. Rodman's car away and hid it. Today, at the hotel where Mr. Rodman stayed in Beausvain, a letter will be received supposedly from Mr. Rodman, a letter which will order Mr. Rodman's clothing and effects sent to Vancouver. The letter will say that he decided to go away with Miss Lord, Miss Beausvain's companion. Everyone in the hotel will think the letter is from Mr. Rodman, and that Miss Lord is safe, for Mr. Rodman talked in Beausvain, and Maurice has a way of knowing everything that happens. So you will both be here. All the people in Beausvain will think you are far away. You will be here, and Maurice will kill Mr. Rodman. Those are his plans. I know them. He does not keep anything to himself. He tells me everything, as he used to tell Miss Morelia to see her suffer. No one bothers us here. Raja had taught them that. Even Ray McClure, who brings our supplies, hates to come. He fears the dog so much. I could never talk, of course, after Maurice came, and he watches me so closely while McClure is here that I dare not ask for help. Miss Morelia did not want me to. It was her punishment, she said, the curse her father had put on her. But Nita, the house is nearly empty. Only the living room is furnished. He does not like things that other people have, things that other people use. At first, he broke all the furniture in the rooms and burned it for firewood. It was terrible to see it go like that, but I could say nothing. Even Miss Morelia did not dare to protest. One room, the living room, was left completely furnished for appearance sake, so that if by chance anyone came into the home, would seem the same. Mr. Rodman was the only visitor we ever had in the 10 years. Miss Morelia has been back. He came the night before your arrival, begging help, as he was lost in the storm. Maurice saw him riding up in the truck with you the next day to get his car. Why are there no mirrors here? Maurice is afraid of mirrors, afraid he will see himself. I can't believe Miss Beausvain is dead. It seems as if she is in the living room, and I will see her again when I go there. She is happier where she is. She has been trying to get away from Maurice for years. That was why she could not talk. She could not walk. Once in their villa outside Paris, he caught her running away 20 years ago, after she had stood everything from him. He wanted her to live and suffer because of him. He's always been like that? Always. He has nothing but hate in his heart. As a baby, he was horrible. As a boy, a devil. And as a man, worse. He is as strong as iron, quick with his mind, so quick he can anticipate your thoughts even before they come to you. He blames his misfortunes, of course, on Miss Morelia. Even as a boy, he blamed her and forced her to do what he wanted. He has never been to school, never would have a tutor, but he is well educated. Knowledge comes to him easily. Morelia told me that as a child he could read incessantly and could quote whole books by his heart. His music is his own. He has never taken lesson, for you must know by now that it was Maurice you heard playing. The piano is a passion with him. Sometimes he played for hours at a time, partly to tantalize his mother and partly to amuse himself. Maurice, his father, was a musician. I remember when he first came to the house, he was about 20 and Morelia 16. He had a letter from his father to old Simon. Morelia and Maurice fell in love at first sight. Simon suspected nothing at first, however, but he did not like Maurice, did not like anyone with the look of an aesthete about him, for Simon was a rough man himself. Maurice went away to New York and then came back again. He used to play to Morelia on the piano in the living room, play by the hour. Then one day, Simon suddenly came in on them in each other's arms. He ordered Maurice to go. I told you how I helped them get away in those days. It was a hard trip to Vancouver from here. They went on horseback, planning to meet at the stage at Winston. Maurice's horse ran away at the third day. Frightened at something, Maurice was killed before Morelia's eyes. She took the body to Vancouver and from there across the country and the Atlantic to Paris, where she buried it. She dared not come home. Maurice's son was born on his father's native soil, but no happiness came to Miss Morelia through his son, only misery and despair. She was forced to sign her entire fortune to him when he was but a boy. And after that, she seldom had any money for herself. Maurice had it all. She shielded him in everything he did. Was he not her son and Maurice's? Nita rose and, lighting a candle, started fussing around the kitchen. Mr. Rodman will think we have forgotten him, Janet said, as she followed her in and sat down in the chair. Mechanically, Nita shook her head, then half smiled as she answered, "We can do nothing for him yet. Raja is still with him, I know, else he would be here with you." Through the window, the girl could see the white flowers on Morelia Bosvain's grave. They shone luminous and ghostly in the starlight. "I saw a face twice in the crystal, a man with red hair," Miss Bosvain said. "It was her father. It was Maurice." "How did she get the crystal?" "An old woman gave it to her in Paris, a woman to whom she went in despair when Maurice was quite young. The woman told her that all she could hope for was death, and that she would see her death foretold in the crystal. After that, she wore it always, and was constantly looking at it. If it's true that she carried her chameleon as a charm, is it true that she carried her chameleon as a charm? Yes, I found it for her once in the woods, and I noticed that Raja hated it, seemed to fear it, so I brought it to her. She was afraid of the dog, although he never bothered her while she had the chameleon around her neck. She said it had died last night. Maurice took it from her. He was there last night with her and played. His music almost drove her mad. He knew this. After a little lunch, Nita suggested Janet lie down, rest again, and while she fixed the cot and found a heavy quilt which she put on the floor beside it for herself. Janet protested at sleeping on the cot when Nita was so tired, but the woman could not listen. In a few moments, the girl was asleep. That's where we end for the evening. We went a little over time, but that is quite all right. I think 5 minutes is not too incredibly bad. Let's see what we have here. Hello, good evening, Lauren Morgan Richards, Lemon Juice. Georgina, good evening. Melissa, hello. Riley, hello. Ash Duran, Andrew, hello. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining me on this lovely story. So a few updates. Our ball has been renamed to the ball is renamed to Debauchery Burlesque Ball ATL. There are reasons behind it, but that is what is happening. So I will be in about 2 weeks, almost 2 weeks. I will be in Atlanta on the 2nd of September for Debauchery Burlesque Ball ATL. I will be in Youngstown, Ohio, coming up in October, the end of October. And right now you can find me in, hello, Kelly. You can find me now in New Orleans. I have relocated again. I, as you know, had been living in Long Island, which, for better or worse, I am now in New Orleans. Thank you, Andrew. I am overall enjoying New Orleans. Oh, by the way, I will tell you, I am doing I'm doing sort of a donation-based reading while I am in the midst of relocating. So I'm doing a 30-minute reading for a suggested donation of at least $50 or more. Most people give more, but you can give whatever you want, $50 or more. It's because I'm moving, but it's a 30-minute read, and you can ask as many questions as you like. It's normally $150. We are now temporarily offering it for $50 for the 30-minute one. It still is. It's right now more cost-effective to just get the 30-minute reading than it is to get a 15-minute, because that's $65. So you're getting a very good deal, and I would look forward to having reading for you. I'd love to read for you. I have some other exciting news that I cannot talk about, not yet, but also make certain that you tune in every Wednesday night for the Witches Movie Coven. And I can't say that on Facebook because there's something strange about the Facebook gods get offended at the very mere mention of witchcraft and covens. So at any rate, yes, so if you would like to have a reading, we can do it Zoom. If you're in New Orleans or the New Orleans area, absolutely, you can come here to my devil's mansion here in this. It's not really a mansion, it's a shotgun house, but it's, you know, it's a mansion to me. Anyway, my loves, with that, thank you for all of your likes, your comments, your shares. Thank you for all of your kindness. Thank you for my patrons. I need to update that list. I worked a little bit on my website, so that's good. I still have to change the pictures around. I have to figure out how to do that. Anyway, with that, I appreciate each and every one of you. Unpleasant screams. Good night, my darklings. Much love.